I'm Michael. I was 17 years old and my parents tried to systematically sabotage my future because my twin sister wasn't as successful as I was. Before I tell you about the incredible moment of public humiliation that finally shattered their control and set me free, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It all detonated on a Tuesday afternoon in April. The air in our house was so thick with nervous energy, you could practically see it shimmering. It was mail day. Not just bills and junk mail, but the big, stiff, oversized envelopes from universities across the country. The envelopes that held the coded messages of our futures. My twin sister, Sophia, and I were both vying for spots in competitive pre-med programs. The path our parents had laid out for us since birth. She was perched on the very edge of our expensive, uncomfortable living room couch, her knee bouncing a frantic rhythm against the silk cushion. My mother, Eleanor, was fluttering around the room, pretending to straighten already perfect picture frames, her eyes darting towards Sophia every few seconds. My father, Richard, was hidden behind the wall of his newspaper, a fortress of silence. But I noticed he hadn't turned a single page in over 10 minutes. The entire house was a held breath when the familiar rumble of the mail truck echoed down our obsessively manicured suburban street. Sophia shot up as if she'd been electrocuted. She got to the mailbox first. It was an unspoken rule. Sophia always went first. She returned, shuffling through the stack, her lips moving silently as she sorted. "Okay, 2 for me," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. She ripped one open with practiced flair. A slow smile spread across her face. "Okay, Westfield University. I'm in." A collective sigh of relief went through my parents. "Oh, Sophia, honey, that's just wonderful," my mother cooed, rushing over to envelop her in a hug. My father actually lowered his newspaper to give a tight, approving nod. 1 down. The family honor was secure. Sophia opened her second letter and Northgate accepted. Her tone was flat. Northgate was a fine school, but it wasn't a bragging right. It wasn't a name you dropped at the country club. She then looked at me, her expression shifting. She held out a single pristine white envelope. Embossed in the corner was the official seal of the National Medical Institute. NMI, the best in the country, my dream, my absolute long shot. I took it from her outstretched hand. My own palms were slick with sweat. I retreated to the armchair in the far corner of the room, needing a pocket of space in the suffocating atmosphere. My finger trembled as I slid it under the flap. I pulled out the single heavy sheet of paper. The first word I saw in bold, elegant type was congratulations. A huge goofy grin split my face. Couldn't stop it. It felt like the sun had just burst through the clouds inside my chest. "I got in," I whispered, the words catching in my throat, cleared it, trying again louder. "I got in. I got into NMI." I looked up, my face beaming, expecting, I don't know, a shared explosion of joy, a "we did it" moment. This was a huge win for the family name, right? Wrong. So incredibly wrong. The room had gone utterly, unnervingly silent. My father's newspaper was back up, a shield of indifference. My mother's celebratory smile had evaporated, replaced by a mask of strained concern directed solely at Sophia, whose face had crumpled as she stared at her own thin rejection letter from the same institution. My mother finally broke the silence, her voice a travesty of forced brightness. "Oh, well," she said, her eyes flitting towards me for a millisecond before locking back onto Sophia. "At least one of you got some good news today. It wasn't a congratulations. It was a damage report." My life-altering achievement was framed as nothing more than a consolation prize for my sister's disappointment. My success was an inconvenience they now had to manage. That night, after a dinner eaten in near total silence, I tried to talk to Sophia. I knocked on her door. "Saf, you okay?" "Just leave me alone, Michael." Her voice came back, muffled and thick with resentment. Defeated, I headed to my own room. I thought the worst of it, the acute awkwardness, was over. But as I passed the top of the stairs, I heard their voices, low conspiratorial tones drifting up from my father's locked study. I froze, melting back into the shadows of the hallway. It will be a complete disaster for Sophia's psyche if she has to watch Michael succeed first. My mother's voice was a venomous hiss. She's so fragile right now, Richard. Seeing him at a top school while she's just at Westfield, it will crush her. My father's reply was colder, stripped of all emotion. It was the voice he used for hostile negotiations. I agree. It's an unacceptable outcome. We have to do something. I backed away from the stairs, a chill creeping down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Do something? What in God's name did that mean? I didn't have the answer then. But that quiet, menacing promise was the opening salvo in a war I never knew I was supposed to fight. A war for my own future waged against my own family. To really understand why my achievement was treated like a declaration of war, you have to understand the soil it grew in. My family wasn't just a family. It was a monarchy, and Sophia was the chosen heir. I was at best a member of the court and at worst a court jester whose job was to make the princess feel better about herself. This wasn't a new development. It was the bedrock of our entire childhood. Sophia was the sun. I was a minor planet caught in her gravitational pull. She was vibrant, social, and effortlessly charming. I was the quiet one, the observer, the kid who would rather take apart an old radio than be the center of attention. Our parents interpreted this difference not as personality but as a hierarchy. She was the one to be showcased. I was the one to be managed. Every milestone was a carefully orchestrated event to ensure Sophia's ego remained intact. Take our 10th birthday, for example. I had been obsessed with astronomy for months. All I wanted was a telescope. I had circled one in a catalog, a decent starter model, and left the catalog on the kitchen table for weeks. Sophia, in a fleeting phase, had decided she was into fashion design. On our birthday morning, the living room was filled with gifts. Sophia's pile was a mountain of brightly wrapped boxes. Mine was a small, modest hill. She tore into hers, revealing designer sketch pads, expensive fabrics, a child-sized mannequin. My parents OT and at every reveal. Then it was my turn. I opened my gifts, clothes, a new backpack, some books, all nice things but no telescope. I tried not to let my disappointment show. And one more for the birthday girl, my dad announced, pulling a huge long box from behind the couch. It was the telescope. My telescope. He presented it to Sophia with a grand flourish. She looked at it completely bewildered. A telescope? What am I supposed to do with this? My mother knelt down. Well, honey, we know Michael loves this stuff. We thought it would be a fun thing for you two to do together. The message was clear as glass. My interests were only valid if they could be presented as a gift to her, a tool for family bonding that she would control. I spent that night teaching a completely bored Sophia how to find the moon. My heart a lean lump in my chest. She used the telescope twice before it started gathering dust in the back of her closet. This pattern repeated itself endlessly. It was the 5th grade science fair, an event that became legendary in my own mind. I'd spent a month meticulously building a working model of a hydroelectric dam. It had a water pump, a turbine I'd fashioned from plastic spoons, and a tiny LED bulb that actually lit up. It was my masterpiece. I won first place. I remember the weight of that big blue ribbon on my chest. A feeling of pure, unadulterated pride. Sophia had entered a hastily made model of the food pyramid. When her name wasn't called for any of the top prizes, the waterworks began. They weren't the dramatic sobs of real hurt, but the low, hiccuping tactical tears she had perfected. They were a weapon, and my mother was her prime target. My mom found me by my project, her smile tight and strained. In front of my teacher, in front of my friends, she whispered, "Michael, darling, look at your sister. She tried so hard. You know how sensitive she is. It would be such a kind, generous thing for you to let her have your ribbon. It's just a ribbon after all. Being a good brother is more important." The pressure was immense. All eyes were on me. Being a good brother meant erasing my own achievement. Refusing meant being the bad son who made his sister cry. With trembling hands, I peeled the ribbon off my project board and handed it to her. The tears vanished instantly. My mother beamed. "That's my sweet boy. I didn't feel sweet. I felt invisible. My only true refuge was in the world of science. It was logical. It was fair. The laws of thermodynamics didn't care who your parents liked more. It was in my AP biology class that I found a real ally, Dr. Robert Harrison. Dr. Harrison was a legend, a retired cardiothoracic surgeon who taught high school biology because, as he put it, he wanted to shape minds before they got ruined by medical school. He was sharp, intimidating, and he didn't suffer fools. And for some reason, he saw me. He saw the extra research I did, the questions I asked that went beyond the textbook. He saw the hunger. One afternoon, he kept me after class. The room was empty, smelling of chalk dust and formaldehyde. "Michael," he said, leaning against his desk, "you have a mind for this, a real intuitive grasp of complex biological systems. It's not something you can teach. You either have it or you don't." He paused, his eyes searching my face. "Tell me something. Your parents? Are they fostering this?" I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. They want us to be doctors." I mumbled, the U.S. hanging in the air. Dr. Harrison nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his gaze. "I see the royal we." He reached into his worn leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, intimidatingly dense college textbook. Gray's Anatomy. This was my companion through my first year of med school. "It's yours now. Don't tell your parents. Don't tell anyone. Just read it. Absorb it. Let it be our secret." That book became my holy text. I would spend my lunch hours and free periods hidden in a small dusty study Coll in the back of the school library. The librarian, a kind, quiet woman named Miss Jenkins, became my silent co-conspirator. She had seen my family dynamics play out at countless parent-teacher conferences. My mother monopolizing teachers to talk about Sophia's potential while my father checked his watch. Miss Jenkins never said a word to me about it, but she started forgetting to lock the back study room, and sometimes a thermos of hot coffee would mysteriously appear on the table during my late-night cram sessions before exams while I was selfieing from a book that smelled of history and ambition. My parents were sinking a small fortune into elite private tutors for Sophia. Tutors who would arrive in expensive cars, tutors my mother would boast about to her friends. "Sophia is working with Dr. Alistair from the university. She'd say he thinks she has tremendous promise." I wasn't jealous of the tutoring itself. I was gutted by the blatant disparity in investment. They were betting on her. I was expected to figure it out on my own. It was Dr. Harrison who looked over my college essays. He circled a paragraph where I talked about my passion for medicine. "Good," he said. "But where are you in this? Don't tell them what you think they want to hear. Tell them your truth." He pushed me to apply to NMI. I thought it was a joke. They don't accept kids like me. I'd argued. "What? Kids who are brilliant but don't have a cheering section at home." He countered with a wry smile. "Sometimes, Michael, that's exactly who they're looking for. Talent like yours has to carve its own path. Never ever depend on the good graces of others to validate your worth. Your worth is inherent. Remember that?" In one of our last conversations before graduation, he mentioned he was finally getting serious about a project he'd been dreaming of for years. The Harrison Foundation, he'd said, his eyes sparkling. A way to find and fund promising kids who are being held back by their circumstances. A way to pay forward the chances I got. I thought it was just a nice idea, a retirement project. I had no clue that I was the exact kind of student he was talking about or that his dream would one day become my reality. My other anchor was my older brother, James. He was 4 years my senior and had escaped to college on the other side of the country. He saw our family with the crystal clarity of distance. The summer before he left, he sat me down. "Mikey," he said, using my childhood nickname, "I'm going to give you some advice, and I need you to listen. Mom and Dad are good people, but they have a massive blind spot named Sophia. They will always manage situations to protect her feelings, even if it's not fair to you. It's not right, but it's a fact. You have to be smart. You have to protect yourself." He leaned in, his voice low. "Start a file, a secret one, on your computer. If they say something important in an email, save it. If there's a weird conversation, write down what was said. The date, the time. Sounds crazy, I know, but data doesn't have feelings. Data is just the truth. And one day you might need the truth on your side. Felt deeply cynical, like something out of a spy movie, keeping a file on my own parents. But the look in his eyes was so serious, so urgent that I did it. I created a folder deep within my computer's directory, naming it insurance. For years, it sat there empty until now. After hearing them in the study, I went back to my room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I powered on my laptop, navigated to the insurance folder, and created a new text file. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Date: April 12th. Time approximate 10:45 p.m. Subject: parental discussion regarding my NMI acceptance. Overheard mother and father in the study. Mother stated my success would be a disaster for Sophia's psyche. Father stated we have to do something. Implication is they intend to interfere with my enrollment at NMI to protect Sophia's feelings. It was the first entry, the first piece of data, the first brick in the wall I would have to build to protect my own future. They had made their first move in the shadows. Now, thanks to James, I was ready to start turning on the lights. The weeks following that night were a masterclass in passive aggression. My parents didn't confront me directly. That would have been too honest. Instead, they waged a campaign of strategic neglect, a war of attrition designed to wear me down. Every time I brought up NMI or a housing form I needed a signature on, a question about the financial aid application, the conversation would be deftly suffocated. My mother would suddenly remember an urgent phone call she had to make or get a pained expression and say, "Michael, please can we not talk about all this college stress right now? It's been so hard on Sophia." My father would simply become deaf. His attention suddenly consumed by a non-existent spot on the wall or a particularly fascinating article in his newspaper. They were trying to make my future so inconvenient to discuss that I would simply give up on it. Sophia, meanwhile, leaned into her role as the fragile victim. She would sigh dramatically whenever I walked into a room. If I mentioned a book I was reading for AP Bio, she would murmur just loud enough for our parents to hear. It must be nice to be so smart. It was all a performance and my parents were her captive audience. The inevitable explosion came as it always did at Sunday dinner. This was my father's preferred stage for family pronouncements. To make matters worse, my mother had invited her cousin Victoria. Victoria was a family therapist, and my mother wielded her professional title like a shield, as if having a therapist at the table automatically made our dysfunctional dynamic healthy. My mother served her famous pot roast, a dish usually reserved for celebrations, which felt like a calculated, bitter irony. The small talk was excruciating. Finally, my father placed his knife and fork on his plate with a precise, deliberate clink that silenced the table. "Michael," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "Your mother and I have been doing a great deal of thinking, and we've decided. We think the best path forward for the family is for you to attend Westfield University." I stared at him, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. Westfield? Why would I go to Westfield? I got into the best medical program in the country. "Westfield is an excellent school," my mother interjected, her smile brittle. "And the most important thing is that you and Sophia can be together. You can support each other. It's a built-in support system." Support her, I thought. The words like acid in my mind. What she means is I'll be her built-in tutor, her academic life raft. "I don't need a support system," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "And neither does she. She got into Westfield on her own. My going to NMI doesn't change that. Don't be deliberately obtuse, Michael." My father's voice had a new hard edge. "You know, this isn't just about academics. This is about family. This is about solidarity. Your sister is going through a difficult time, a moment of profound disappointment. A good brother, a good son would choose to stand by his sister, not abandon her to chase some prestigious brand name." Abandon her? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I'm not abandoning her. I'm going to college." How is that selfish? It's selfish because you are putting your own ambitions above the emotional well-being of this family. My mother cried, her voice cracking with manufactured hurt. "All of our friends, everyone at the club, they'll all be asking, Where are the twins going? What are we supposed to tell them? That one ran off to a top-tier school and the other one didn't. It makes it look like there's something wrong with her with us. So that was it. Not Sophia's feelings? Not really. It was their own image, their social standing. My success was a public relations problem they needed to solve. Victoria, the therapist, cleared her throat, sensing her cue. Now, Richard Eleanor, she said in her infuriatingly placid professional tone. Let's try to hold space for Michael's feelings here. This is a tremendous achievement, and it's valid for him to feel proud and excited. My mother's head whipped around, her eyes narrowing into slits. Victoria, with all due respect, you are our guest. This is a private family matter. Victoria, a supposed professional in conflict resolution, wilted instantly under my mother's glare. Of course, my apologies. She picked up her water glass and took a long, slow sip, effectively removing herself from the line of fire. So much for an ally. I felt a surge of cold fury. I looked directly at my father. I am going to the National Medical Institute. He held my gaze, his eyes like chips of ice. Fine, he said, the word landing on the table like a block of granite. That is your choice. But choices have consequences. If you choose to turn your back on this family, then you can choose to pay for your prestigious education yourself. As of this moment, you are cut off. Not one more dime from me or your mother. Not for tuition. Not for housing. Not for a single textbook. Nothing. You want to be an adult? Fine. Let's see how you handle it. The threat was absolute. He expected me to crumble. He saw a 17-year-old kid with a part-time bookstore job and no savings. In his mind, the match was over. Checkmate. But he didn't know about my secret weapon. He didn't know about my best friend, Lucas, whose father was a corporate lawyer. Lucas and I had spent countless hours at his house, and I'd picked up more about the world from his dad's dinner table conversations than I had from any civics class. I knew about student loans, financial aid appeals, and the legal age of majority. I met my father's icy stare with one of my own. Okay, I said, my voice shocking even myself with its steadiness. I'll handle it. The flicker of stunned disbelief in his eyes was the only victory I could claim that night. He had expected me to beg, to bargain, to concede. He had not expected me to call his bluff. The rest of the meal was a silent, agonizing affair. But the real attack, the one that proved this wasn't just about control but about outright sabotage, came 2 weeks later. It wasn't a threat delivered over pot roast. It was a silent digital assassination attempt. It started with an email. It was from the NMI Financial Aid Office. A bland bureaucratic message with the subject line, "Update regarding your financial aid package." My heart started to pound as I opened it. The email informed me that due to recently updated financial information provided by your family, my eligibility for the NMI need-based grant was being reevaluated. It stated that my expected family contribution had significantly increased and therefore my grant would likely be reduced or eliminated entirely. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Updated financial information. My dad's business was booming. What were they talking about? I spent an hour in a panicked haze, searching online for any reason this could happen. Had my dad lost a big deal? Was the company in trouble? Nothing. The company stock was at an all-time high. Then the cold, cynical advice from my brother, James, echoed in my head. Data is power. I dialed his number, my hands trembling. James, it's me. They did something. I read him the email. He was silent for a moment on the other end. Then he swore a sharp, violent word. Those bastards, he breathed. Mike, they didn't get fired. They didn't lose money. They lied. What do you mean they lied? There's a loophole kind of, he explained. His voice a mix of fury and analytical calm. Parents can submit a professional judgment request to a financial aid office claiming a change in circumstances, job loss, high medical bills, or a business downturn. They've submitted a fraudulent claim that their income has plummeted. They're deliberately tanking your financial aid package from the inside. The sheer calculated malice of it took my breath away. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a premeditated strategic move designed to make my dream financially impossible. They weren't just refusing to help. They were actively, secretly working against me. They were trying to break my legs so I couldn't run the race. Why? Was all I could manage to whisper. Because if you can't afford an MI, you have to come back to them, James said, his voice grim. You have to accept their terms. You have to go to Westfield. They're not giving you a choice. They're taking all your other choices away. Mike, this is war. I hung up the phone and felt a wave of nausea. I stumbled to the bathroom and retched into the toilet, my body convulsing from the sheer shock and betrayal of it all. It was one thing to be treated unfairly. It was another to be actively hunted by your own parents. After a few minutes, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red, my face pale. But behind the fear, I saw a flicker of something else. A hard, cold anger. An anger that burned away the tears. I walked back to my room, my steps firm. I sat down at my laptop and opened the insurance folder. I saved a PDF of the email from NMI. I created a new document. Date May 2nd. Subject: Financial sabotage attempt via University Financial Aid Office. I detailed everything. The email, the conversation with James, the fraudulent nature of the claim. I was no longer just a son. I was a plaintiff building a case against my own blood. My father thought he had delivered the killing blow. But he had made a critical mistake. He had underestimated his enemy. He had turned me from a victim into a fighter, and I was just getting started. The phone call to the National Medical Institute's financial aid office was the single most terrifying thing I had ever done. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was a 17-year-old high school student about to accuse my wealthy, powerful parents of committing fraud against a top-tier university. The whole idea was absurd. But as I dialed the number, James's voice echoed in my mind. Data is power. Don't feel. State the facts. When a polite but firm-sounding woman named Mrs. Gable answered, I took a deep breath. Good morning, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. My name is Michael Evans. I'm an incoming freshman and I'm calling about an email I received regarding a reevaluation of my financial aid package. I explained the situation as calmly and factually as I could. I didn't use words like lie or sabotage. I was clinical. I have reason to believe that the updated financial information the university received may not be accurate. My acceptance and initial aid offer were based on my parents' official 2017 tax returns, which I have a copy of. To my knowledge, their financial situation has not negatively changed since that filing. In fact, it has likely improved. Mrs. Gable was quiet for a moment. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. Mr. Evans, Michael, this is a highly unusual and delicate situation, she said, her professional tone unwavering. Legally, as you are still a minor, your parents are your financial guardians. My heart sank. This was it, the legal wall I couldn't climb. However, she continued, our acceptance was offered to you based on your exceptional academic merit. The integrity of our admissions and aid process is paramount. Please hold for one moment. I need to consult my director. The on-hold music was a tiny, awful version of a classical piece that grated on my raw nerves. Each second felt like an hour. I imagined them having a good laugh at my expense. The crazy kid accusing his parents. I was ready for her to come back on the line and politely tell me there was nothing they could do. But the voice that returned was not hers. It was a man's, deep and authoritative. Michael, this is Dr. David Patel, the Director of Admissions. Mrs. Gable has briefed me on your situation. Yes, sir. I managed. I pulled your file, Michael. I remember your application personally. Your essay on mitochondrial DNA was one of the most insightful I have ever read from a high school student. We want you at NMI. His voice was not just reassuring, it was validating. The situation you describe is deeply concerning given its unusual nature and the fact that your 18th birthday is just 3 months away. I am personally placing a temporary freeze on any changes to your financial aid package. The grant you were offered is secure for now. Once you turn 18, We will require a formal notarized statement from you along with any supporting documentation you have to permanently resolve this. Until then, the file is sealed. The relief was so sudden and overwhelming that I had to sit down on the floor of my bedroom. Thank you, sir. I breathed. Thank you so much. We believe in backing our students, Michael, Dr. Patel said simply, especially the ones who show this kind of initiative. Welcome to NMI. We'll see you in the fall. I had won a crucial battle. I had secured the beachhead, but the grant only covered a third of the cost. The rest was a vast, terrifying ocean of debt I had no way to cross. My father's threat to cut me off was still a loaded gun pointed at my head. I knew my next move. That Saturday, I drove to my grandparents' house. Elizabeth and Harold Evans were cut from a different cloth than my father. They were self-made, building a small tool and die shop into a manufacturing empire. They were pragmatic, sharp, and valued integrity and hard work above the flimsy currency of social standing. They had always been kind to me in a somewhat distant way, but I knew they saw the toxic dynamic in my father's house. They just subscribed to the philosophy of not meddling in their children's affairs. Today, I was going to force them to meddle. I didn't show up crying. I didn't show up complaining. I showed up with a briefcase Lucas's dad had let me borrow. I was treating this like the most important meeting of my life. I sat them down in their sun-drenched study, the room smelling of old books and lemon polish. I laid everything out. I'm not here to complain about my father, I began, my voice clear and steady. I'm here to present a business proposal. I opened the briefcase and took out a neatly organized folder. I walked them through the entire situation, my acceptance to NMI, the fraudulent financial aid submission, my call with Dr. Patel. I showed them the emails. I showed them my father's W-2 from the previous year, a copy I'd quietly made from the tax file in his office. I showed them the insurance file. Then I presented them with a detailed spreadsheet. I had calculated everything down to the last dollar. Tuition, university fees, the cost of a double-occupancy dorm room, the unlimited meal plan, a budget for textbooks from the university bookstore, even a line item for laundry and local transportation. The final number at the bottom was huge and terrifying, but it was real. I am not asking for a gift, I said, looking each of them directly in the eye. I am asking for a loan. I have drafted a contract here. I pushed a second document across the polished mahogany table. It outlines the total amount requested for all 4 years. It proposes a 5% interest rate which is competitive with the current federal student loan rate, and it stipulates a repayment plan that will begin 6 months after my graduation from medical school. I am asking you to be my angel investors. My grandfather, Harold, a man who had negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, picked up my spreadsheet. He studied it without a word, his face a stern, unreadable mask. My grandmother, Elizabeth, a woman who had managed the company's books for 40 years, read my homemade loan contract, her lips pressed into a thin line. The silence was deafening. This was it. If they said no, my dream was dead. Finally, my grandfather placed the spreadsheet down. He looked at my grandmother and they exchanged a long, silent look that was a conversation in itself. Then he turned his piercing blue eyes to me. Your father, he said, his voice a low rumble, always had a weak spine, cared more about the shine on his shoes than the dirt on his hands. He forgot that a man's worth is what he builds, not what he inherits. My grandmother folded the contract and placed it precisely on the table. We will not be your investors, Michael, she said, and my stomach plummeted to the floor. Because an investment implies a risk, she continued, a small sharp smile touching the corner of her lips. And you, my dear boy, are not a risk. You are the sheest bet in this room. We will not give you a loan. She paused, letting me twist in the wind for a second. We will, however, she said, her voice full of steel, be establishing the Michael Evans Educational Trust. It will be funded to cover your entire educational and living expenses for the duration of your medical training. The funds will be dispersed directly to you under your sole legal control the day you turn 18. Think of it as an advance on your inheritance, an investment in a legacy of competence, not the legacy of appearances your father is so concerned with. I was floored, utterly speechless. I just stared at them, my mouth agape. My grandfather stood, walked to the antique phone on his desk, and dialed a number from memory. Robert Harold here. Listen, I'm instructing you to liquidate my position in the Whitman Richards development project. Yes, all of it. I want it done by market close on Monday morning. No, the fundamentals are fine. My personal priorities have shifted. That's all you need to know. He hung up. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't threatened. In a single calm 60-second phone call, he had pulled a multimillion-dollar rug out from under my father's most prestigious ongoing project. It was a declaration of war fought not with angry words, but with the cold, brutal language of capital, a message my father would understand perfectly. That summer was a blur. I worked 40 hours a week at the bookstore, my hands smelling of paper and ink. But every night, I was at the library, not just studying from Dr. Harrison's textbook, but meticulously applying for every single private scholarship I could find. The trust was my ultimate safety net, but my pride, my burning need to do this myself, demanded I try. I remembered Dr. Harrison's foundation and spent a week pouring my soul into the application essay. I was building my own future brick by painful brick. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel like a supporting character. I felt like the hero of my own story. The first year at NMI was like stepping out of a black and white movie into glorious Technicolor. For 17 years, my world had been a small claustrophobic stage where I played a part one never auditioned for. Here I was just Michael. I was surrounded by people who didn't know my sister, didn't know my parents, and couldn't care less about my family's social standing. They only cared about one thing, the work. I found my tribe almost immediately. Zoe, a whip-smart girl from a tiny town in Oregon, and Amir, a hilariously cynical guy from Chicago. We bonded over a disastrous first chemistry lab, nearly setting a countertop on fire. And from then on, we were inseparable. We were a three-person study machine fueled by vending machine coffee and a shared terror of failing. They were the first real friends I'd ever had who saw me for me, not in relation to someone else. Academically, I was on fire. The years I'd spent teaching myself in the dusty corners of the library had given me a foundation stronger than I realized. I found a new mentor in Dr. Lena Wilson, my cellular biology professor. She was a brilliant, non-nonsense researcher who saw the passion behind my questions in class. After I aced her midterm, she offered me a coveted spot as a research assistant in her lab studying genetic markers for rare neurological disorders. I was doing real science, contributing to something that mattered. I was thriving. My 18th birthday in November was a quiet affair, but it was one of the most significant days of my life. I walked into a lawyer's office downtown and signed the documents that officially activated the trust my grandparents had established. With a few strokes of a pen, I became completely, irrevocably financially independent. The next day, I sent a notarized letter to Dr. Patel at NMI formally closing the dispute over my financial aid. The war my parents had started was from a legal and financial standpoint over I had won. They didn't take it well. The silence from their end was deafening. My father's prized Whitman Richards project had stalled after my grandfather pulled his funding. A public failure that was a deep wound to his ego. According to James, the atmosphere at home was glacial. They tried a few last-ditch efforts. My mother left a rambling, guilt-laden voicemail about breaking her heart, and my father sent a single terse email offering to reconsider his position if I would reconsider mine. I deleted them both without replying. Their power over me was gone, and they knew it. I thought with the charming naive of a newly liberated prisoner that it was all over, but the universe had one last spectacular act in store for me. In late May, an official-looking email landed in my inbox. The subject line was Dean's Award for Academic Excellence. My heart skipped a beat. I opened it. I had been selected as the sole recipient of the Dean Award for First-Year Research Excellence. It was a massive honor, a validation of all the long hours in Dr. Wilson's lab, and it came with a presentation at the prestigious Black Tie Annual Awards ceremony. Out of a deeply ingrained and frankly stupid sense of familial obligation, I called home to tell them. "Oh, that's nice, dear," my mother said, her voice hollow and distant. But I knew they would be there. This wasn't about pride. This was a command performance. They had to show up dressed in their finest and play the role of the proud, supportive parents. It was a PR move, a desperate attempt to quell the whispers that had started circulating in their social circles about the trouble with their son. The night of the ceremony was an out-of-body experience. The grand ballroom was glittering, filled with the intellectual and financial titans of the medical world. I saw my parents near the back talking to another couple, their faces arranged in masks of pleasant interest. My father in his tailored tux, my mother in a tasteful but expensive gown dripping with pearls. They looked like perfect strangers playing a part. When my name was called for the research award, my legs felt like jelly. I walked to the massive stage, shook the dean's hand, accepted the heavy glass plaque, and mumbled a few words of thanks to Dr. Wilson and the dean. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, but I was only aware of two pairs. I saw my parents clapping politely, their smiles as brittle as spun sugar. They had done their duty. They had been seen, but the night was far from over. After a few more awards were presented, the dean returned to the podium. And now he announced, his voice booming through the sound system. "It is my distinct personal and professional honor to introduce our keynote speaker. He is a man who is not only a distinguished alumnus of this very institute but a true pioneer in his field, a giant in the world of cardiac surgery, and more recently a dedicated philanthropist whose work is shaping the next generation of medical leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Harrison." My head whipped up so fast I felt a crack in my neck. "Dr. Harrison, my Dr. Harrison." He walked out onto the stage, looking every bit the titan the dean had described. He exuded an aura of calm, unshakable competence. He scanned the audience, and for one brief electric second, his eyes met mine. He gave me the smallest of nods, a tiny, almost imperceptible gesture that felt like a secret message just for me. He began his speech, his voice resonant and captivating. He spoke of the future of medicine, of innovation, of hope. And then his tone shifted, becoming more intimate, more personal. "But the greatest challenge for any student," he said, his gaze sweeping the room of wealthy donors and esteemed faculty, "is not always found in a textbook or a laboratory. Sometimes the most daunting obstacle is simply getting the chance to be in that classroom in the first place." A hush fell over the room. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my parents. They were no longer smiling. "This year," Dr. Harrison continued, his voice ringing with passion, "I had the privilege of launching the Harrison Foundation for Medical Promise. Our inaugural award is a full-ride 4-year scholarship designed to find and champion a student who possesses not only a brilliant mind but something far rarer, an unbreakable spirit, a student who has faced down profound adversity and simply refused to be denied their dream." He looked down at his notes, though I knew he wasn't reading from them. In reviewing the applications, one story seized our attention. The story of a young man with a staggering intellect, a passion for healing that was palpable. But it was his essay that truly took our breath away. He wrote not of his many accomplishments, but of his silent struggle. He wrote of overcoming unthinkable obstacles, not from poverty or misfortune, but from the very place that should have been his safest harbor. He wrote of fighting a quiet war just for the right to let his own light shine. The air in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I wasn't breathing. I dared to glance at my parents. Their faces were ashen. Their smiles were gone, replaced by identical masks of stark, dawning horror. They knew he hadn't used my name, but he was painting a portrait of my life for a room full of their most important peers. Dr. Harrison looked up, and his face was alight with a fierce pride. This young man did not ask for a handout. He asked for a chance. And by God, he has earned it 10 times over. Ladies and gentlemen, the first ever recipient of the Harrison Foundation Scholarship is a student who embodies the very spirit of resilience, integrity, and brilliance we seek to honor. He paused, letting the suspense build, and then he looked directly, unmistakably, at me. The recipient is Mr. Michael Evans. Silence. For one heartbeat, the world stopped. Then the applause erupted. It wasn't the polite, measured clapping from before. It was a roar, a thunderous, rolling wave of sound that washed over me, shaking the very foundations of the room. The entire hall surged to its feet. My professor, Dr. Wilson, was beaming, clapping wildly. Zoe and Amir were screaming my name. My grandparents, who had driven 6 hours without telling me they were coming, were on their feet, my grandmother weeping openly into a handkerchief. The dean was gently guiding me back toward the stage, my body moving on autopilot. The spotlight found me, pinning me in its white-hot glare, and as I walked up to shake Dr. Harrison's hand, a living legend, my hero, I looked out into the sea of faces and found my parents. They were standing. They had no choice. The entire room was standing and they were clapping. Their hands were moving in the mechanical jerky motion of automatons, their faces frozen in a grotesque parody of pride. They were trapped in a public nightmare of their own making, forced to participate in the deafening public celebration of the very sun they had tried so desperately to break. Dr. Harrison grasped my hand firmly, the scholarship award heavy in my other. He leaned in close, his voice a low, triumphant whisper meant only for me. You carved your own path, son. Now go show the entire world how brightly you can shine. That was it. That was my victory. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't private. It was a symphony. It was public, undeniable, and absolute. It was freedom. The rest of the evening felt like a dream. I was surrounded, enveloped by a warmth and genuine pride that was entirely foreign to me. Distinguished professors with names I'd only seen on textbooks shook my hand firmly, looking me in the eye and telling me my future was bright. Wealthy donors, the kind of people my parents spent their lives trying to impress, clapped me on the shoulder and told me my story was an inspiration. The contrast between this and my life before was staggering. I had spent 17 years being told my accomplishments were inconvenient, a source of trouble. Here in this world I had fought my way into they were currency. They were my identity. My grandparents finally broke through the crowd. And my grandmother, a woman I had never seen show more emotion than a tight smile, hugged me so fiercely it knocked the wind out of me. We knew it, kiddo. My grandfather boomed, his voice thick with emotion as he clapped me on the back. We always knew you had the steel. My real family, my chosen family, was there, too. Dr. Wilson gave me a proud maternal smile. I expect even greater things from you in my lab now, Evans, she said with a wink. Zoe and Amir just tackled me in a group hug. Dude, Amir said, his eyes wide with disbelief. That was the most savage, epic, legendary mic drop in the history of the world. I think you actually broke your parents. We all burst out laughing. A real joyous, unburdened sound that felt like uncering a bottle that had been shaken for years. I saw my parents from across the room. They were isolated, standing awkwardly by the grand exit, a toxic island in a sea of celebration. No one was talking to them. They had become social kryptonite. After a few agonizing minutes of standing there, being pointedly ignored, they turned and slipped out a side door, vanishing into the night. Their retreat was more eloquent than any screaming match could have ever been. They hadn't just lost the battle. They had been routed from the field. Later that night, long after the reception had wound down, and I was back in the quiet sanctuary of my dorm room, the 2 heavy awards sitting on my desk like trophies from a forgotten war. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the red decline button. A part of me, the old conditioned part, wanted to just ignore it to avoid the confrontation. But the new Michael, the one who had walked across that stage, knew this was the final piece of the puzzle. I couldn't let them just fade away. I had to be the one to formally end it. I had to close the door myself. I took a deep breath and swiped to answer. Michael. His voice came through the speaker. It was a voice I almost didn't recognize. The booming, confident authority that had dictated my entire life was gone. In its place was something hollow, strained, and exhausted. It was the voice of a man who had been utterly and completely defeated. Dad, I said, My own voice was calm, neutral. A long, heavy silence stretched between us. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing. That was quite a spectacle tonight, he finally said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was an awards ceremony, I replied simply, refusing to take the bait. Your mother is very, very upset, he tried, falling back on his oldest, most reliable weapon. My mother's emotional state. But the weapon was rusted and broken. It had no power over me anymore. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And the strangest part was it was almost true. I wasn't sorry for what happened, but I was sorry that their own choices, their own bitterness had led them to this public humiliation. I was sorry that they were so broken that they had to try and break me, too. What that man, what Harrison set up there. His voice trailed off, choking on the name. It was completely inappropriate. It was unprofessional. He made us look. He made you look exactly how you looked. I finished for him, my voice still quiet, still even. He told the truth. He just did it in a ballroom instead of a courtroom. Another suffocating silence. I could feel him on the other end, waiting, probably hoping for me to explode. He wanted me to scream, to rage, to finally unleash 17 years of stored-up resentment. That would have given him an opening. He could have fought back, called me ungrateful, hysterical, disrespectful. He could have twisted it to make me the villain. But I denied him the battle. The white-hot anger I had carried for so long had been lanced on that stage, draining away and leaving behind a strange, calm clarity. What do you want, Dad? I asked the simple question, cutting through his floundering. The question clearly caught him off guard. What do I want? He repeated, sounding genuinely confused. I want my family back. I want things to go back to the way they were. That's never going to happen, I said, and the finality in my own voice was absolute. I will always be your son. James and Thomas will always be your sons. Sophia will always be your daughter. The family isn't gone. But the dynamic is the system where my worth was measured against her feelings, that's over. The reality where my future was a bargaining chip for your social standing, that's over. The parents who would try to sabotage their own child's future out of pride and fear, they have to be over, too. I took a deep, steadying breath. I was no longer the boy pleading for fairness. I was the man dictating terms. If you and Mom want a relationship with me moving forward, it will not be as my guardians. It will be as my peers. It will be based on respect. Respect for me as an adult, respect for my choices, and respect for my life. I will not be your project to manage, and I will not be your scapegoat to blame. I will be your son who you treat with the dignity he has earned. Those are my terms. You can choose to accept them or not. He was silent for so long I thought he might have hung up. I could picture him perfectly sitting in his cavernous leather-bound office. The man who was used to giving ultimatums now completely stripped of his power. I see, he finally whispered, the words sounding like they were physically painful for him to form. I hope you do, I said. I have to go now. I have a genetics exam to study for. And I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I just pressed the red button. Clean and final. I turned back to my desk, picked up my textbook, and started to read. The war was over. The silence in my room was no longer the sound of loneliness. It was the sound of peace. It was the sound of my own life finally beginning. The years following that explosive night were not marked by grand dramatic events, but by the quiet, steady, and deeply satisfying process of building a life. The central toxic conflict that had consumed all the oxygen in my world was gone. And in that new clear air, everything else finally had the space to grow. At NMI, I wasn't just a student anymore. I was a researcher. The Harrison Scholarship had bought me the most valuable commodity in the world, time. I no longer had to worry about finances, so I could pour 80-hour weeks into Dr. Wilson's lab. We were working on a fascinating project involving CRISPR technology to target rare neurological disorders. It was difficult, often frustrating work, but it was meaningful. I co-authored my first published paper in my third year, a milestone that felt more significant than any award. My friendship with Zoe and Amir became the bedrock of my social life. They were my family. We celebrated holidays together when I didn't go home, complained about impossible exams, and supported each other through the grueling demands of medical school. They taught me what healthy, reciprocal relationships felt like. The ripples from that awards ceremony continued to spread, creating tangible consequences for my parents. My father's professional life took a significant hit. The world of high-stakes real estate development is a small insular one that runs on reputation and perceived integrity. The story of what he had tried to do to his son, embellished and whispered from one country club to another, had made him toxic. His longtime business partner, Mr. Whitman, a man who prized his own sterling reputation above all else, engineered a buyout of my father's stake in their remaining projects. My father wasn't ruined. He was still a wealthy man, but his career had peaked. He was no longer a player. He was just a man with money. Sophia's journey was the one that surprised me the most. She attended Westfield, but without me there to serve as her academic crutch or her emotional scapegoat. She was forced to stand on her own 2 feet for the first time in her life. It was a brutal adjustment. I heard through James that her first year was a disaster. She was overwhelmed by the workload and used to professors who were indifferent to her excuses. She failed her first major organic chemistry exam. I remember getting a call from her late one night during her sophomore year. It was the first time she had initiated a call to me in years. Her voice was small and fragile. "Hey," she'd said. "Hey, sophomore, is everything okay?" There was a pause and then a shaky breath. I failed my anatomy midterm," she confessed, and then she broke down. Not in the performative tears of our childhood, but in the ragged, hopeless sobs of genuine despair. "It's just so hard, Mike. I study and I go to the review sessions and it just doesn't stick. I don't know how you did it. I don't think I can do this." In that moment, all the years of resentment I'd harbored toward her just dissolved. She wasn't my rival anymore. She was just a kid who had been sold a false bill of goods her entire life. Told she was a prodigy when she wasn't, and was now collapsing under the weight of expectations she could never meet. For the first time, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated pity. "Hey," I said gently. "Yes, you can. It is hard supposed to be. There are no shortcuts, sophomore. It's just work. You just have to do the work." Every day I spent the next hour on the phone with her, not giving her answers but teaching her how to study, how to make flashcards, how to outline chapters. It was the first truly constructive conversation we'd ever had. She ended up switching her major to nursing the following year, and to everyone's surprise, she blossomed. She was empathetic, great with patience, and a natural caregiver. The pressure to be a world-class doctor was gone. And in its place, she found a career she was actually good at, and more importantly, that she actually liked. She was finding her own way to shine, far from my shadow. The final piece of understanding, the why behind my father's baffling cruelty, came from an unexpected source. My Aunt Patricia. She was my mother's sister, a pragmatic woman who had always managed to stay above the fray of our family's internal politics. She came to visit me in my 4th year, and we went out for coffee. In the middle of our conversation, she grew quiet. She reached into her purse, pulled out a worn, creased photograph, and slid it across the table. It showed 2 young boys in matching sweaters squinting into the sun. One of them was clearly my father, looking small, shy, and deeply uncertain. The other boy looked like his mirror image, but taller, broader, with an easy, confident smile that radiated charisma. "Who's that with Dad?" I asked. "That," she said softly, "is your Uncle David Richard's older brother? The one the family doesn't talk about." The revelation stunned me. I never even knew Dad had a brother. "Oh, he did," she said with a sad smile. "And David was a shooting star, a true prodigy, valedictorian, state debate champion, full academic scholarship to Yale when he was 17. He was brilliant, charming, effortlessly good at everything. And your father spent his entire childhood living in the shadow of that perfection. He was always David's quiet little brother. Always the second best, the one who tried so hard but could never quite measure up." She took a sip of her latte, her eyes distant. "David died in a drunk driving accident the summer before his senior year of college. It shattered the family. Your father was devastated, of course, but on some deep dark level he would never admit. I think he was also relieved. The race was finally over. The shadow was gone. She looked at me and her eyes were full of a profound, tragic understanding. And I think, Michael, that deep down your father swore he would never ever let one of his children feel the way that he did. He saw your brilliance, your easy intelligence, and it terrified him. He looked at you and saw David. He looked at Sophia and saw himself. And he tried to rig the game. He became so obsessed with protecting Sophia from the pain of his own past that he became the very thing he'd always hated. He became the parent who picked a favorite, the one who had to dim one child's light to make the other feel warm. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. It doesn't excuse a single thing he did to you, Michael. It was monstrous, but that's the reason. It was never really about you and Sophia. It was always about him and David. I stared at the photograph of the uncertain little boy who would grow up to be my father. A man so haunted by the ghosts of his own childhood that he ended up creating new ones for his own. The anger I held for him didn't vanish, but it transformed. It was no longer a hot, raging fire, cooled into something else. A deep, weary, and profoundly sad pity. The years after graduation moved at the relentless pace of medical training. I matched into a highly competitive surgical residency program at a major hospital. Life became a blur of 24-hour shifts, endless rounds, and the visceral, terrifying, and deeply rewarding work of learning how to save lives. It was exhausting, all-consuming, and I had never been happier. My life had found its own rhythm, completely separate from the one I grew up in. My parents and I maintained a polite, carefully constructed distance. We spoke on major holidays and their birthdays. The conversations were brief, sticking to safe topics like the weather and my work schedule. The old dynamics of control and guilt were gone, replaced by a kind of formal, respectful truce. We had found a way to coexist, which was more than I had ever hoped for. My relationship with James remained my anchor, and my connection with Sophia continued its slow, cautious evolution. We were rebuilding from the ground up, getting to know each other, not as the golden child and the scapegoat, but as two adults on their own paths. She was a phenomenal nurse, beloved by her patients and respected by her colleagues. She had found her own light, and it was beautiful. One evening, after a particularly brutal 36-hour shift, I came home to my small apartment, my body aching and my mind numb. There, in the pile of mail on my kitchen counter, was a letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Sophia's. It wasn't a birthday card or a Christmas greeting. It was just a letter on simple stationery. With a sense of tired curiosity, I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in her neat, precise script. Michael, I've been trying to write this letter for a long time. There's so much I want to say, and I don't know if I'll get the words right, but I have to try. I'm sorry. I know those are just two small words and they can't possibly undo years of what happened, but I need to say them. I'm sorry. When we were growing up, I loved the attention. I loved being the favorite. I was selfish and insecure, and I let Mom and Dad use my feelings as an excuse to hold you back. I saw that it was unfair, but I didn't care because it benefited me. That's a hard thing to admit about yourself, but it's the truth. For years, I was so angry at you for what happened at that award ceremony. I thought you had deliberately tried to humiliate us, but I was wrong. I was watching an old home movie the other day of our 10th birthday. I saw you get that ribbon at the science fair. I saw the look on your face, and then I saw myself start to cry, and I saw Mom make you give it to me, and I finally understood. You weren't trying to humiliate us. You were just, for the first time, refusing to give up your ribbon. I'm not writing this to ask you to forgive me. I don't know if I've earned that. I'm writing it because I want you to know that I finally see it. All of it. And I am so proud of the man you've become. I'm proud of your strength and your integrity. I'm proud to be your sister. With love, Sophia. I read the letter once, then twice. A deep, shuddering breath escaped my lungs. A breath I didn't even realize I had been holding for 20 years. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about acknowledgement. It was about being seen finally by one of the people whose blindness had hurt the most. It was the last ghost being laid to rest. I walked over to the large window in my apartment. The city sprawled out below me, a glittering galaxy of a million other lives, a million other stories. I thought about that little boy with his hydroelectric dam, the lonely teenager hiding in the library, the terrified young man on the phone with the admissions director. He had felt so powerless for so long. But he wasn't. Power, I realized, wasn't something other people could give you or take away. It wasn't about money or status. Real power was the quiet, unshakable belief in your own worth. It was something you had to build yourself in the dark, brick by painful brick. And once you've built it, no one can ever tear it down. That was my inheritance. Not a trust fund, not a family name, but the hard-won knowledge that I was enough all on my own. And it was the most valuable thing I would ever own. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it touched you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to be seen for who you truly are? I'd be honored if you'd share your own story or thoughts in the comments below. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss